our presenter, we have Professor Jaan Valsiner. He's a professor of cultural psychology at Aalborg University. And this academic year, he's also working here at Tartu University's Semiotics Department as an expatriate Estonian visiting professor. Jaan Valsiner is one of the world's leading cultural psychologists, and in his research, uniting cultural psychology and semiotics over the last 2 decades. As an alumnus of Tartu University from 1976, he has spent most of his lifetime in search for solutions to impossible to solve tasks, of which the topic of allegories is a new addition. Professor Valsiner also provided us with some complementary texts that you can find on Semiosalong's Facebook page linked there. So if you want to read afterwards, there's some allegory going on. And the link will also be shared in Zoom chat, I think. Professor Valsiner's presentation today in connection to mythocatalysis is about how allegorical sign fields set the stage for human dramas.
So thank you everybody for being here in person and also on the Zoom. It is more than heartwarming to follow up the previous presentation because it brings back to me as an Estonian very much in transit all over the world some very specific aspects of allegorical making of Estonianness that you just saw in the previous presentation. All the 3 excerpts of Estonian poetry that you saw read and presented in parallel with English translations were a remarkably nice introduction to my topic right today. Namely, all of them were deeply personal, either on behalf of the poet oneself or in behalf of the character. They were deeply linked with nature, as you saw in some of the topics, and all of them were none about it. They were all about feeling Estonian, making Estonian language to be heard, becoming Estonian, and no surprise then that from generation to generations, Estonians who were singing to Koidula's poetry will have tears in their eyes. So in other sense, the allegorical startup from the first starters of Estonian literature have had social function that has grown further in the Estonian minds over 2 centuries and basically keeps framing it even today, although we rarely think about it as our allegories actually are influential in our present world. Which way? Okay, go this way. So the central notion that I want to talk about is the notion of silent sign fields. So in this sense, the 3 examples of Estonian poetry of the past would very nicely illustrate the silence in the sound. So they were all very voiceful, beautiful in their particular way of phrasing, and so on, but at the same time they were nicely silent about the bigger picture that they were referring to. And this is, interestingly enough, very much a semiotic term, semiotic issue that we see in most of the semiotic analysis, namely how to analyze affective atmospheres of here and now, affective atmospheres of a nation over time, affective atmosphere of a nation over 200 years, out of which only a relatively short period the nation was independent at all. So in terms of semiotics, we have always concentrated on iconicity, indexicality, and symbolism. But actually what I want to do today is to say that this is somewhat trivial elaboration of semiotics coming from Sanders Peirce. We can do better looking at Peirce's other aspects. How do I do it? These are the 2 specific contributions I would consider I have brought to the field. The left side there, you would see my basic perspective on combining what I call schematization and pleramatization in the making of generalizations and hypergeneralizations. Schematization is a very simple notion that we know very well from all of our cognitive science, philosophy, and even psychology, cognitive psychology, which means that we turn complex phenomena, complex experiences into categories with which they then start to operate in our discourses. This is almost ordinary in our everyday life. The extraordinary aspect which goes in parallel and interconnected with it is what I call pleramatization. This is a notion of making a semiotic field, sign fields, that are richer than the original experience. And it's exactly here where the notion of allegories becomes quite important, not in the categorization side. The right-hand side is my elaboration of different ways of communication given our experiences. The main focus of it is a level 4, that you see, that's the notion of hypergeneralization. In hypergeneralization, the particular feelings that before could be discussed in words at levels 2 or 3 vanish but remain at the same time highly functional. Or I would even say, exactly as they are vanishing into the depths of our minds, they become more functional than our usual discourses in using language. So when we become deeply philosophically silent about ourselves, if our silence takes us over completely, then we have operating at level 4, which we cannot speak about unless we translate it back to level 2 or level 3. So this is a basic background from which I am trying to approach the notion of allegories today. This is one of the very first documented allegory, Giovanni Bellini's 1490 Sacred Allegory, which of course can be read at different levels. It can be read as a scene of nature with a garden, but it has also been suggested it is actually a deeply allegorical take of the Garden of Eden and everything that goes with it. Of course, this interpretation is not from 1490, it is from the early 20th century, but it could be not a surprise to all of us that most of our hypergeneralized communication happens through particular sign fields which are not interpretable in terms of particular elements that are there. Or, let us put it better, which are difficult to interpret by simply listing the elements in the whole. The whole dominates and the whole is itself not in the picture but beyond the picture. So, this is one of the examples of this. So when we come to the overwhelming world of allegories, what do we see? We see all kinds of interesting pictures. For example, this is considered allegory of music, painted by Carl Gustav Carus, an early 19th century medical doctor, psychologist, philosopher in Sachsen, in Dresden, who almost came to Tartu University being offered a job as a gynecologist in 1814, but he turned it down and went to Dresden instead. So, secondly, you will see a particular notion of allegory of fecundity by a court artist of Dirk de Guade von Ravenstein of Rudolf II in Prague, so to say. You see different aspects of the paintings, all of which lead us to an interesting question: how are allegories made? What is a particular issue of allegories? First of all, there is a particular event, as you see in this general picture, which becomes interpreted in terms of meanings which are generalized already. Meanings move into other meanings, A to B, and so on, and so on, and so on. At certain moment, from the already generalized meanings, there is a tendency towards hypergeneralization that is leading to level 4. And exactly at that moment when this is about to happen, particular lateral schematic insert is possible. And this lateral thematic insert is exactly the making of allegory in some direction. Something is declared to be allegory of something else. This making of an allegory may happen at the time when a particular painting is made by the painter oneself, explicitly or implicitly. But it can also happen even 200 years later, when somebody who is reselling a particular painting decides to add a notion of its title with an allegorical implication or even explicit allegory, so that it would sell better. Or in a particular painter, and in this case I'm working with court painters of the Rudolf II at the end of the 16th century, who would paint battle scenes of different kinds, most of which the emperor actually lost or didn't win at least. But at the same time, nevertheless, the battle scenes were depicted by the artist, court artists, and they were of course meant to glorify the emperor. So you lose or win a particular event, your artist will always glorify you as a winner, which is quite important in our political life, even in our present day. Of course, many of the allegories were extremely, at that time in the 16th century and so on, were extremely overloaded by specific details. This is one of these particular ones that was very widespread in terms of graphic lists. This is another one, filled with all kinds of graphic images, in enormous overload, as you may know on the Peter Bruegel. His tendency to put together all kinds of children's games in one painting, and also in this case put into place Netherlands proverbs, also which were not identified more or less before 1950s. Also, the painting itself goes back to 1559. So it's literally a combination or construction of allegorical statements about proverbs, which can be put into verbs, but they were not put, of course, by the artist. So in other sense, we have a constant flow of particular hypergeneralized meaning systems in terms of particular sign fields, which are non-verbal in the presentation, for example, in paintings, paintings of collections like this, or glory paintings that you would see in the chapter I suggested in the additional reading, so to say. At the same time, these are creating the affective atmosphere for the people who are observing them, remembering them, or even forgetting them. So in the middle, in the very, very corner, this particular remarkable painting, if you look into the very right-hand corner on the top up, you see, if you try to analyze it, you see this. A particular man is depicting as creating one's excrement under the gallows, and the particular proverb decoded from Netherlands history is to crap on the gallows, or to be undeterred of any penalty. And of course, there are 86 of these encoded in the big painting that you saw. So how does the production of allegories fit into semiotic dynamics, the perspective I bring into cultural psychology, and now here in Tartu also to semiotics? This is a very basic semiotic system, picture in irreversible time. My signature is that of the emphasis always on irreversibility of time, which this differentiates past, present, and future. In that process, particular sign becomes constructed for the present moment. And this sign may be also supported by different particular personal memory systems as well as social representations in the society. And it starts to operate as a particular allegory in two ways. First of all, it does its own particular role here and now, that is for sure. But at the same time, it sets an indeterminate communicative message to the future. So as is becomes as could or should be in the future. And there are two branches in the allegory making that are quite crucial in this sense. One is anagogic ascent, which hypergeneralizes a particular life philosophical meaning, going back to the examples of Estonian poetry. All of the deeply personal lived through allegorical notions about Estonian nature and language are actually leading to the very one specific glorification of the native country, which at the time of the poets was not yet even there, but became to be there in the century later on. So no surprise that Christian Jaak Peterson is not translated for 100 years. It was exactly the 100 years that would make it possible for his work to reach a level where the allegorical nature of it would be relevant for the society. And at the same time, of course, there is a particular what is called tropological guidance. There's the moral imperatives about relating with the world. So the allegorization leads to two directions, leads to hypergeneralisation on the one hand, which maintains its function over time, over irreversible time, and then it downwards to the particular guidance of how to act in moral terms in one or another moments of encounter with our environment, so to say. So this is basically my little contribution to it. So this is the notion of. So and here you see a very interesting little painting, Parmigianino from 1533, which was tediously copied by Joseph Heinz in Rudolf II era. And the interesting issue here is that you see the number of particular elements that are in the background, but the relevance becomes quite important in the foreground. This is exactly the two children. This may be all what I wanted to say. It is all, I think. So thank you, and I am very open to all kinds of questions and commentaries.
Professor, would you say that allegories are actually like products of imagination?
Oh, of course, they start from a private imagination without any doubt. But exactly as they start from the private imagination.
I mean, think about imagination. Allegories, let's say, in some way twist. Imagination also, not in some way, completely twists the reality. So.
Well, here I disagree. Imagination doesn't twist the reality, but the imagination sets the stage for the future encounters with the reality. Imagination is an absolutely central aspect of human psychological functioning, because thanks to it, the person can, here and now, create an image. Imagine that one is not here and now, but somewhere else. That particular imagination moves ahead of the person and very often leads the person to particular actions which may be totally irrational from the point of view of here and now, but at the same time may lead to exactly the innovations that human beings are known for. Can it twist the reality? Yes, it twists the reality, but the twisting of reality is a necessary aspect of growing further, living on, rather than misfit with the reality. Yes, we're all misfitting the reality, or if we did fit the reality as it is, there will be no development, personal development possible, no societal development possible, and basically we would live in a society of robots which can be only replicated in a robot factory.
Okay, and do you think like this anticipating future can also be some sort of allegory? Because we're not certain about the future, we don't know. I mean, future is a part of imagination too.
Yes, of course, it's part of our personal lives. We need the allegories, we use the allegories. It is part of the social life. We are given the allegories. The emperor is great, yeah? For example, in the case of the 16th century. We invent the hyper-generalized allegories ourselves collectively, so we are basically living with the help of the allegories, even if we don't notice them. And my point about the present-day life is that we seem to live in a highly rational world, where decisions are made on the basis of calculating this and this and this and that. Yeah? But behind all that rational world is exactly the tears of Estonians who sing the song of Ma isamaa on minu arm and cannot stop crying. This is not rational, but it is very deeply felt into the particular societal structure, starting from Lydia Koidula in this sense. Without Koidula, the song would not exist. That comes from her personal feeling into the particular situation she was in at the time. Now, after Koidula, every reader, reciter, would have fit into that particular recitation one's own personal feeling system and the tears that come with it. And finally, the big song festival that presents a song in the same text will guarantee the collective relevance of the allegory put into practice, not to speak of the singing revolution, which is an Estonian characteristic which I don't think any other country has ever changed the political power by 6 hours of singing. So to say.
How would you say this approach or understanding this dynamics is relevant for psychology today?
It's very difficult to generalize about psychology today because it comes in so many different directions, paths, based on so many different axiomatic assumptions. For example, the axiomatic assumptions of cultural psychology are completely different from those of cognitive psychology and so on. But if we try to answer that question, I think the critical issue in psychology comes actually following your question before. That is the role, how we understand the notion of imagination in the totality of the structure of the psychological functioning. In the traditional psychology, imagination has been a kind of impossible to ignore, but somewhat uncomfortable phenomenon. Namely, this is messing up our efforts to be rational. Our imagination can twist the reality, as you pointed out. It can create us totally unrealistic realities, so to say. It can make us mad. We may become mad poets, as was said before, whatever. So that's a traditional way of separating imagination from the psychological system, or trying to push it to the side. Whereas what we are bringing in here in this cultural psychology of dynamic semiosis is the centrality of imagination. We live forward into the future. And the only way we can live forward into the future and the next step is to imagine what would happen at the next step. And if we imagine that, we may be right or wrong. I mean, the next step may give us totally different aspects than we imagined at a given moment. But the act of this kind of imagining leads into further living and further. And that is a contribution that could bring psychology close to the reality which it sometimes is losing.
Thank you. Are there questions in Zoom from people in Zoom?
Hello?
Yes, please speak.
Hi. Thank you for your excellent talk, Professor Valsiner. You characterized your talk as a divergence from semiotic. You said icon, index, symbol are inadequate, and for the most part, I agree with you. They're a bit underdeveloped, and we can go much farther than that. Nevertheless, your analysis of painting reminded me quite a bit of, for example, Frederick Sternfeldt's Persian diagrammatic analysis of painting and diagrammatology. I know you're familiar with Frederick's work. Also, the description of the function of time here, this retrospective redefinition of the meanings of the paintings according to changing cultural context, remind me very much of Yuri Lotman. So, do you have anything to say about that? Okay.
Well, there are obviously connections of my work with Yuri Lotman, there's no doubt about it. I borrow very many important ideas from Lotman and modify others. So that is quite clear. Now, when it comes to the question of retrospectiveness, I would not say that. I would say that the making of the signs is a prospective and not retrospective act. It can become analyzable retrospectively, of course. That is the moment of the irreversible time when the sign operates cannot be captured reflexively as it would be. So it's in this sense, yes. So yes, of course, I'm trying to build on Lotman in different ways, ways that actually move a little bit away from Lotman, as people in my seminar here in Tartu have had the possibility to observe. Yeah.
I know you're familiar with Professor Stjernfeldt at Aalborg University, and I was wondering if you're familiar with his work, his diagrammatic analysis of paintings, that is, iconistic analysis of classical paintings like Christ and the Levitating Cross, for example.
I have not looked into it. This is not, I haven't yet reached them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions from people participating online? You're very welcome to speak up.
I have one question. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, so my question is, at which point can allegory or this allegorical insertion turns into ideology and into mythology in the sense that Barthes speaks of mythology, or whether it does at all, or are you thinking of something else?
Very good question.
So basically, my question would be
missing in what I presented, but it's a very good follow-up and exactly something that needs to be answered. So almost certainly the particular allegorization that happens either by personal hypergeneralization or by insertion, as you point out, it moves into the making of the mythopoetic realm of the existence of the person and society. Now, certain aspects of those, under some circumstances, will be turned into ideologies, and very strong ideologies in many ways. And of course, the affective starting point that comes through generalization of affect, pleromatic generalization, and then hypergeneralization of affect on behalf of the persons, makes this idealization possible. And this is quite important in our present-day world, exactly to see how the threshold from mythopoetical field to the ideological field is transcended, what could stop it from moving this way. Because our world is filled with growing new ideological uses of human beings so deeply dedicated to the ideologies that they lose any uniqueness of themselves, thinking beyond the ideologies. You saw that in the history of human beings, human societies. You see it nowadays very clearly with the issues of Islamic dedication to creating a new emirate in Syria, which failed, of course. All of these are examples of this ideological overdetermination of human lives, which are very, very challenging to almost anybody in any society. So work on this on that threshold that you bring in is exactly very important.
We have some time for a discussion, so also comments and mind wanderings are really welcome. Sure, just a moment.
What do you mean imagination can make us mad? I mean, imagination in psychology is like a defense mechanism.
Well, any defense can make us mad if we take it sufficiently far. So to say, it depends how you defend, what you defend, where you defend. So my notion of linking it with Leave example from before is exactly that the particular hypergeneralized aspects of human being that you see me advocating have their potential darker side, which can occur but usually do not occur in us. The notion of ideological dedication that we were just discussing here is one step before or to the side of it, maybe. Hopefully not before, but to the side of it. Would you consider a totally dedicated ideological fighter for something who can kill anybody on the way? Would you consider this a madman? He's not a mad poet, obviously. He's a mad killer. So, or does the adding of the notion of mad to that particular phenomenon change anything in the phenomenon? I don't know.
Imagination needs to be trained not to be dangerous. I mean, I know that from experience.
Well, good. But it can also become dangerous.
Just two observations. One is your description in the scheme that you showed actually mirrors the Marx and Engels Communist Manifesto very well. The past experience of exploitation and the development of a utopian ideology, no? And the second one is comment is where does, I mean, in all the examples that you made from contemporary history or contemporary political situation, where does the allegory come in? I mean, what role does it play? Is it so constitutive in your system that we must search for it? Or where is it, implicitly or explicitly?
Well, I cannot, of course, compete with Marx in this sense, and I will not try to do that. The second question of where are the allegories in the present-day ideological systems? Well, they are somewhere invisible. That was a point I started to make from the beginning, but they are very powerful. Searching for the promised land, going as an Islamic convert from Scandinavia to Syria, only to find the civil war position, is not very different from the 1490 allegory of the Garden of Eden that you saw in Bellini. That's basically the making of a particular background field demand or field orientation, searching for the promised homeland, searching for the homeland in general. That is actually the, if we start to analyze the tiers of the singers of Estonian national songs in the song festival, this is also built on a particular underlying allegorical field of Isamaa being existent as an ideal story, rather than a piece of land which is bordered on political maps, so to say. The making of any particular new idea, for example, new idea in psychology, would be somehow flavored in some kind of a hypergeneralized field kind of supporting the move in this direction rather than another direction. It's not an obligatory direction that we're talking about. So my starting point was exactly that the allegories exist in our background today, but they are hidden. They are almost invisible, although they become visible in particular directions of interpretation of otherwise very mundane little aspects, so to say. And this is an interesting part which needs to be inquired. I do not have any answers here.
I will check if there are any questions in the chat. There are currently none.
I have one more comment. Can I?
Israel, we cannot hear you at the moment.
What about now?
Yes.
Better?
Yes, good.
Okay. So it's just one comment, but because it seems to me that what is being discussed now, it has to do with what I would like to call it like the upper threshold of semiotics. And I think this very closely relates to Tyler's dissertation and some ideas he has been sort of advancing regarding Tardo signs, which have to do, if I understand what he says correctly, with this sort of invisible sign fields that they are just so automatic. And this has, like, to me, it seems that this is a very contemporary preoccupation in semiotics, because I think Antti Randvir has also been working in similar things, also from our department. So yeah, well, I just wanted to make that comment like sort of bring echo here and say that to me it seems that this is a sort of discussion about the upper threshold of semiotics, which is not so often discussed, but it's also quite important. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think you are right. I think it is in the upper part of the semiotics for sure. And indeed, any particular effort, intellectual effort, to try to make sense of this field-like phenomena in semiotics, especially field dynamics in the flow of the meaning backgrounds of ours. This, I think, any of these efforts would belong to a similar category. Yeah?
There is a hand up in Zoom, so please, Transglobalist Time Machine, you can speak up.
Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot to change the account. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to say that I think it's very interesting, this kind of analysis about, in this case, the examples of fine arts that you just exposed. And I think it is a very critical point to worry about those kind of analysis because of, I would say, the crisis we are living nowadays in culture, spectacles, fine arts. It's like, we could say that fine arts are getting less important here on America. I am from Mexico. And so I find very interesting this kind of analysis because this kind of makes a little bit of justice on fine arts. And my questions for you, Master, will be the following. Is there any circle of scientists who are encouraging this kind of analysis besides you, to whom I can refer, and so I can access to this scientific material of analysis? The first one, and the second one will be, what do you think that will be the next path to develop this kind of scientific analysis? I mean, taking into account that it is a very critical point in the history, right? To precisely expose this kind of value in fine arts. And well, that will be it, and thank you in advance for your answer.
Thank
Cheers
you.
to all from Mexico.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Israel already mentioned a few scholars here in Tartu who are dealing with similar issues. I am a relative newcomer to that high level of semiotic efforts. So I came to it more or less by coincidence, because in my own building of the theory of the dynamic semiosis, I could not, at a certain moment, ignore the ways how hypergeneralized meaning value systems or sign systems are organized, and there came the question of allegory. And from there came the allegory actually looking into the Renaissance discourses around Rudolf II, because all of the interaction at this time, for anybody whose interaction we can remember or know now, was based on allegories rather than ended in allegories. So the allegorization was complete and explicit, whereas nowadays, as our discussion comes out, allegorization is becoming implicit. Now, what could be a next step on how to analyze this scientifically, and what is scientific in this kind of looking into the clouds of sign fields? This is an interesting and very difficult question, because in some sense, the phenomena here defy both psychological sciences' traditional repertoire as well as semiotics' traditional repertoire. They are very dynamic, they are hypergeneralized, they are hidden from our immediate retrospection, prospection, and so on. And at the same time, they are existing as we feel ourselves in our everyday life. So at a certain moment, we just start to cry because of a particular poem, which happens to be that of an Isama. Yeah? So all of this needs a totally new way of looking at the scientific terminology and scientific analytic tools, which semiotics could be very close to. But I don't think it is completely there, because the question of turning semiotics into a dynamic and developmentally oriented science is yet to happen, in my understanding at least. So I think that you can do it, or you personally, as well as people in the audience, if you're interested in it. I don't know if I can do it.
Okay, well, thank you for your answer. I think it's very clear, and I surely will contact you in the meantime. And well, thank you all. And I just would like to add that well, I'm a creator too, and in my experience, madness is kind of part of the process of creating, you know, and yeah, it's true. We need to train our imagination because it can be very dangerous too. Once you get into it, you can create parallel worlds, and the creator is still human, but it's already making human things, right? So, thank you all.
Thank you.